What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked on Bucks. And today, as we like to do often, we're just going to marvel at the greatness of Giannis so far. I was on my computer this morning. I was flicking through some of the numbers at EuroBasket, and it is truly insane stuff. And then we're going to look ahead to the game with Germany tomorrow, which brings us back to a conversation we loosely started the other day. Dennis Schroder, he's having a lovely tournament for Germany, but he doesn't have a home in the NBA. Why is that? And do the Bucks need him? We'll get back into that and more. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show daily and also find some other work over at ESPN alongside me from the Bucks Radio Network, just starting to get himself warmed up for preseason basketball in 3 weeks. It's Justin Garcia. And of course, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every day. And you guys and girls are really doing that in the last week. Our last 3 podcasts are all post-game pods from EuroBasket, but they're in our top 5 now of YouTube all time. We've been on YouTube for about a year, so it's been a massive week. We appreciate everyone, even if you're listening on the old audio platform because you don't want to look at me. I don't blame you for that, but we appreciate everyone listening. It's great. Everyone's fired up for the EuroBasket. Justin, you guys in the US, you're getting some afternoon basketball action. This game against Germany, I believe the tip-off is 1:30 Central Time. It's going to be fun, unless, of course, you are working through the toils of Monday to Friday life, and afternoon basketball is not favorable.
Yeah, no, it's been fun so far with EuroBasket, and it's basically like what you have for NBA, where it's
That's right.
It's these times, whether it's late morning or early afternoon, like today's is going to be, as you pointed out. Like that's been the nice part. Is it's like your version of the NBA, and it's kind of like the NCAA tournament as well. Only there's more of a rooting interest in Giannis than I think there is in the Badgers or Marquette around here.
Yeah, so the 4:30 a.m. tips are starting to get a little bit old. But I'm actually, I always had a lot of respect for our friends over in Europe, but it's like the opposite for me. I feel like our European friends during the NBA schedule, which is wouldn't be fun. But we know there's a lot of dedicated people out there that still don't miss a Bucks game, which is insane to me. Before we get to this Germany game, though, I'll tell you what else is insane to me, and that is the tournament that Giannis is putting together. Leading the tournament in scoring per game, 29 points per game at this point. And we know, shout out to our great friend, Frank Madden. He's been desperate for Giannis to get over the 30-point per game mark in an NBA season. Will he do it in EuroBasket? Hopefully a few games to go. But the thing that's even more ridiculous about this is he's playing 27.9 minutes per game, which in my very rough and quick math, which someone will correct me if I'm wrong, there's no doubt about that, that comes in at a cool 37.4 points per 36. It's ridiculous.
It's pretty good. It's like the 2019 season for him, only better. And you can put me in that camp too. We talked about it on one of the shows over the summer about what can Giannis do to get the third MVP. And I don't think anybody wants to see it as much as Frank, but I'm there as well. Like just get to 30. I know we rounded up last year, but that's really the only thing that's left for him to accomplish is a second championship and a 30-point per game season. And if he's doing this in that amount of minutes, and granted the level of competition is a little different, but I'll certainly take that as some momentum going into the season.
Yeah, no question. So one thing that he hasn't got, and we've said this, the one thing that he hasn't got is a scoring title in the NBA. We know he was pretty close and certainly in the mix for that last season. So, who knows projecting ahead to the NBA, but it has been fascinating. There was always the question, well, what is Giannis going to do in the FIBA game? Is Greece going to have the personnel around him that will help maximize what he's able to do? At this point in time, and particularly with Greece playing so well, he's in line for potential MVP of this tournament. But I had a few YouTube comments yesterday, and it's been interesting to follow along with these and learn more about the Greek team and the Greek players. But the question I asked is do Greece need a secondary scorer? Do they need a guy that they can heavily lean on? Because they don't really have it. There's about 5 or 6 guys that have been contributing and chipping in. But another YouTube commenter said, well, this Greek team is, and maybe there's a bit of home cooking here on this comment, but they said this Greek team is great. They would be in medal contention without Giannis. And I had to pull the brakes up on that one. I think this is a pretty good Greece team. I think they've got contributors right up and down, and that's why they're in the mix for a medal. But let's not kid ourselves. If Giannis isn't playing on this team and adding his 30 points per night on insane efficiency, getting to the line more than 10 times a game, they're not winning a medal. This is still Giannis doing an incredible amount of the heavy lifting here, even if he is only playing 28 minutes.
Yeah, it's basically what we saw. I guess you could go as far back as the spring and that series against the Celtics, where you saw just what his talent level is, and we knew that. But to see it again against a team that we knew was the best or second best team in the Eastern Conference, depending on how you viewed the Bucks, and to see a Bucks team that was what they were at the end of the season with no Chris Middleton, and looking at that Celtics team and seeing that the Bucks took them to 7 games, it is almost entirely because of Giannis, especially when you factor in the offensive struggles for guys like Bobby Portis and Grayson Allen, that you were, knowing the defense wouldn't be there, they'll at least help us out offensively, that it's nothing new. And he's doing the same thing with the Greece team. And I think the most encouraging thing, and again, this is something that we saw throughout the course of not only this past season, but the last few seasons, the most encouraging thing is how we continue to see the mid-range develop in these games with him. And he just looks much more comfortable taking pull-up, not even threes, but pull-up mid-range jumpers near the free throw line. And a couple of times that we've seen that Dirk one-legged fadeaway jumper as well. He's not going to be mistaken for one of the best mid-range players in the game, but as long as it's something that you can't just write off and say, like it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that, we know this guy can score around the basket, but that's it. He's no longer that. So as long as that keeps getting better, that's the most encouraging part from what we've seen through the summer for Giannis to me.
47 for 57 from the free throw line as well. So that's up around 82%, which we know, look, we're not going to jump to any conclusions here. We've been here before over the course of the last few years, but it's nice. I saw a few people comment that, the FIBA rules, there's less time to shoot the free throw. He's changed his routine, but we saw this last year. The one dribble gets it up there in 5 to 6 seconds. So, look, it's at least been encouraging to see him shoot the ball well from the free throw line. It's an interesting comparison you made with the Middleton situation gone in that Boston series. So I want to come back to that after I talk about BetOnline.net. I spoke about BetOnline.net on yesterday's show with pro and college football starting to hit its stride, getting going. Then you can find all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. If you think the Packers, I should say, can bounce back next week, go check the odds at BetOnline.net, and there's futures there, potential NFL Super Bowl winners there as well, and NBA. I mentioned it, only 3 weeks away roughly until the preseason. So go to betonline.net and find all your NBA odds, whether it's the division, conference, MVP, which we've spoken about on this show. Go to betonline.net today using your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Giannis. Which NBA player moves the betting line the most this season? Locked On and BetOnline odds makers present the NBA top 50 most valuable players starting on September 19. Find it on Locked On NBA, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. And speaking of the most valuable players, Justin, maybe we're a little bit biased, but I don't think it's a conversation. The most valuable player is Giannis. But you brought up the comparison with the Boston series to this Greek team now. So I think you're right. I think we were watching that series against Boston and we were saying, geez, we know what Giannis is going to do. He's going to get you 35 points per game. We know what Giannis is going to do in this EuroBasket tournament. He's going to get you 30, but who is the second guy? Mentioned on yesterday's podcast, someone like Nick Kalathis. if he's knocking down the threes, has proven to be a valuable secondary scorer. Tyler Dorsey, another player in there. Slukas has had some great moments. So there's a number of guys there, but you're just not sure who it's going to be. Now, does that matter? I think no, if they're knocking down the threes. But in that game yesterday against the Czech Republic, they needed every bit of Giannis in the fourth quarter, including the threes that he hit, because overall the team shot 30% from three, and that's still a vulnerability. And as I joked, Giannis probably used to some
teammates
below
not
average
hitting threes.
below average 3-point shooting in big games. Yes.
Teammates not hitting outside shots in a tournament format. Yeah, he's seen enough of that.
So a question I have for you, though. So I mentioned Nick Calathes, and I was in some discussion with listeners after yesterday's show, because inevitably the conversation comes up that, gee, this Greek coaching staff is using Giannis better than they do in Milwaukee. And I kind of look, I mean, to me, and whatever. People, I've got a reputation. I'm a Bud defender. That's fine. I think Bud's a good coach. But I'm not necessarily seeing that they're really even using him all that differently anyway. I mean, he's got the ball in his hands a huge amount of the time. Is he getting touches in the post a little bit more? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think there's a huge difference there. You made the point that he's looking to score from different areas on the floor. So how much is that coaching? How much is that development in Giannis's game? I'm not necessarily, and it's not a knock on the Greek coaching staff, by the way, but Giannis is Giannis at this point. He's dominating the way that we've seen him dominate in other games. But the big difference is that Nick Calathes is genuinely a pass-first point guard. So maybe Giannis gets some different looks in that regard just for the skill set of Calathes. And I was thinking about it. Giannis has really never played with a pass-first guy like that.
Yeah, I mean, unless you were completely ignoring the greatness of Kendall Marshall, but yeah, that's basically that's been the list of point guards when you think about it through here. Yeah. Eric Bledsoe was not your pass first point guard in the traditional sense. Even Brandon Knight was the guy that was basically a two guard that was playing point guard, and now Drew Holiday, we've said the same thing about since his arrival, that Giannis has never really had that guy. I mean, you make the Kendall Marshall joke, but even the guys that back him up, the reserve point guards that the Bucks have kind of in a similar role as well. I mean, look at George Hill, and not just this past year, but his first stop here. George Hill wasn't, your traditional point guard per se. So it's been something that's kind of evaded him, certainly in his NBA tenure. To go back to the point you made about the Greek national team and Giannis's usage there, I agree overall with what you said. And I mean, I'm certainly been accused of it and guilty of it, of being a Bud defender as well. I think the big difference is, number one, as we've seen through the years, it's just not Bud and his coaching style to exploit mismatches. And I think that's probably the biggest thing you would point to with Giannis and trying to get him onto different guys, and not just Giannis, but especially with him. But with his Greek team too, I mean, you made the point of just how good he's been in this tournament. He's the best player in the tournament in EuroBasket. And I mean, it's not the level of play in the NBA. So to me, it's more so of we have the best player in this tournament. And with the talent pool in this thing, yeah, it's not a bad talent pool, but far and away, we have the best player that makes up for a lot. So just go score and go do what you want. I agree that I don't really see a whole lot that's different as much as it's more so than at the NBA level, just saying, hey, Giannis, just go beat this team.
Yeah, and again, this is a point I referenced last week, because it's not disrespectful to these teams who clearly have high level players that play in Europe, whatever it is. But there are just straight up some guys that you see trying to defend Giannis, and you're just like, look, there is just no hope. There is absolutely nothing they can do at this point. And by the way, there's only a handful of guys that can do it in the entire world. So yeah, that's no knock on those guys. Giannis is just different at this point. But what about the idea of Giannis with a pass first point guard? So we know a couple of years ago there was the flirtation with the idea of Chris Paul, and there was some reports out there that suggested maybe he wasn't really into that idea. But it would be, if you really want to, because there's always this talk, well, play Giannis off the ball, use him as a screener, and that's fine. And they've had great success with that and improved success with that as they've been more willing to try different things with Giannis, I think, over the last couple of years. But it is at least interesting as a thought to wonder potentially in the future what could be unlocked if he does play with, now Chris Paul's obviously the elite of the elite, but a guy that is looking to set guys up perhaps more so than the guys they've had in the past. Brogdon, obviously another player that they can all handle the ball, but a lot of the time scoring is probably what they're better known for.
Yeah, I guess it's the one thing that's left to really see. And the funny part is, like, Chris Paul, we could point to for years, and obviously he's still active, but with how the game has changed in the last 10 years, it's been much more rapid. But really, for the last 20 years, it's started to evolve more and more. That with how this has become positionless basketball, there's just fewer and fewer of those guys that you can't be one-way players anymore. It's not to take away from just being your traditional point guard, and a guy like Chris Paul is not a flawed offensive player, but you can't be that one-dimensional anymore, where he's a guy that's going to set guys up and not so much shoulder the scoring load and maybe a defense we didn't talk about as much. You have to be more well-rounded, that if you are a one-dimensional guy, you have to really be elite. And in terms of, playmaking, that's kind of, it's not quite as common, where you see guys that are, hey, he's just an elite playmaker and maybe he's not going to score a whole lot. You don't really have that anymore. So I think that's kind of starting to go the way of the dinosaur, that we don't really have very many of those point guards left anyway.
No, and if they are there, they are giant point guards. And a couple of my Australian friends, Ben Simmons one. And again, you talk about a flawed offensive player in certain aspects, but certainly elite passer. The idea of Giannis playing with Ben Simmons is pretty interesting when you combine the size, the defensive stuff that they would be able to do. So that would be interesting. And then the other Australian that came into the league last year that, again, is probably a past first guy, Josh Giddey type as well. So, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know where it lies, because it does lead me to the next conversation. And as we look ahead to this game against Germany, and don't want to look too far ahead, but we've spoken about it a few times. The draw has opened up a little bit. Jokic and Serbia obviously upset in their first knockout stage game. And this German team's been pretty good. And there's a number of NBA guys on the roster front. Wagner, I think, is having some ankle problems. I think so. I think he's under a little bit of a cloud for this game. We'll see if he plays. Maybe there's some news by the time people are watching this. But Dennis Schroder is the other one. Frank briefly spoke about him towards the back end of a podcast a couple of days ago, but he's a leading scorer, 19 points per game, having a pretty good tournament. Doesn't have an NBA home. Now, I would say, based on the conversation we just had, he fits more of the score-first guard as well, rather than a traditional point guard. But he is a guy that's attracted some interest for obvious reasons. He's probably one of the higher quality players that doesn't have a home in the NBA. Are you surprised by this, and are you intrigued by the idea of a Bud Schroder reunion?
I'm mildly surprised, I suppose, just because there's a number of bad to fringe level playoff teams. That Dennis Schroder, I mean, that was us with the Bucks for years and years in the early 2010s and prior to Bud arriving, where Dennis Schroder is one of those guys that still has name value, that you talk yourself into, well, he can get us to 40 wins or to 39 wins, and we can fight to get to the bottom end of the playoffs. Am I intrigued by him at all? No. And I think the big thing with me is, we touched on, you can't be one-dimensional, and Dennis Schroder is a one-dimensional guy. I've seen a lot of Bucks fans, because it seems to be very polarizing with this name specifically, that a lot of Bucks fans that are against it have pointed to, well, look at Dennis Schroder's previous stops and what's happened with those teams. Sometimes that can be an unfair assessment that there's more going on that we know of. But the more it starts to pop up that the team success isn't there, you do have to take that into account. For me, though, I'm just not intrigued by it because of the defensive end. He's a 6'1", basically shooting guard that's playing point guard. And he's a guy that, throughout his career and certainly the last few years, though it's tapered off a little bit, he's been a heavy usage guy. And, it's all well and good to say he can help you juice the bench, but he's going to have to play some minutes with Giannis and or Chris and Drew, even with the 2-point guard lineup that we've seen Bud employ. And I just don't want Dennis Schroder with the ball or Dennis Schroder getting that usage over Giannis or Chris Middleton. And that, to me, is what presents the biggest issue with him. I know it's easier to obtain Dennis Schroder since he's a free agent than a guy like, say, Jordan Clarkson, who's another one that's kind of become the apple of Bucks fans' eyes with the trade machine, saying, well, these two guys would trade for Jordan Clarkson. It's kind of the similar argument and discussion I'd make for him, though. If you made me choose one of the two, I'd be more inclined to take Jordan Clarkson, but still the high usage, heavy scoring point guards that don't really bring a lot defensively at this point, it just doesn't interest me with this team.
Yeah. So the reason why, as you pointed to, that, I'd be fine with it is because I think that the biggest question mark about the roster right now is the backup point guard spot, because we don't know what you're going to get from George Hill. And I understand he's a guy that has fallen out of favor with a large percentage of the fan base, but we need to see whether he's healthy and see what he has in the tank. And then I think, Javon Carter, to this point, how much development does he have? I know he was a popular guy towards the back end of last season, but we'll see whether he is a guy that by the end of the season has locked down legitimate backup minutes on a title contender. I'm not convinced. So Schroder, to be able to just get him for nothing, a guy that is an NBA player, I understand why that's attractive. Interestingly, going back to the Chris Paul conversation, because if you look at Schroder across the course of his career, he's been a scorer, not necessarily an efficient scorer, not an efficient finisher at the rim, not a great three-point shooter, but he had one really, really, really good season where he was efficient. He was finishing at the rim. He was 53% on corner threes. He was playing alongside Chris Paul. So it's interesting, if you think about his skill set, and there's always an idea or a desire with the Bucks based on what we've seen in the postseason that they need more scoring. They need a guy that can get you 20 points in the playoff game. I kind of agree. I'm just not sure whether he is that guy, but given the fact that he could be picked up for nothing, and you don't have to give anything away, you don't have to lose Grayson Allen, who I still think is an important player to this team, and that's why it's attractive, because you're probably not getting a player that can score like he can anywhere else for nothing at this point.
Yeah, and look, if it comes down to really a couple of names on, you got to look at the number of players that are on the roster and who's going to be in those minutes. So as of this moment right now, would I rather have Dennis Schroder on the floor for, let's assume 10 minutes, 15 minutes, somewhere in that range, hopefully, maybe more, but hopefully it's around 15 minutes in the playoffs, then George Hill? Sure. Then Jordan Nwora? Yeah, I would. I think we know what's out there, but I still wouldn't jump to make that move just yet.
No, I think there's plenty of time to get to that point. And you mentioned his defense. So, Frank had similar thoughts to you the other day, and there was significant pushback about what he can do defensively. There's a lot of people that like what he can do on the defensive end. I think size is. I think it's ultimately in today's NBA, once you get to the postseason, the size is just a limiting factor. It just is. There's no real way around that. It's not necessarily a lack of effort, but it can be difficult when it gets there. Hey, just before we wrap this up, a friend, we have to say, once they're on the podcast a couple of times, which this man has, is definitely a friend of the podcast, polarizing figure among Bucks fans, George Karl. Into the Hall of Fame, along with Del Harris and also Larry Costello, who, by the way, only two championship coaches in this franchise history. Larry, one of those, and our friend Mike Budenholzer, the other one.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up all of them because I saw a lot of George Karl mentions, but not a whole lot of Larry Costello mentions. Just kind of by the way, Larry Costello got in, and Del Harris for that matter. But Larry Costello is still probably Bucks fans of a certain age remember him and honor him and give him the credit he deserves. But by and large, he probably still does not get the credit he deserves in this franchise's history for those years, not just the championship year, but really the guy behind, in terms of coaching, the heavy era of success that they had in the early 70s. So congrats to all three of them, and to Costello's family and Del Harris and to George Karl.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's always pretty fun as checking out the Manu Ginobili speech, which is fun. And it's kind of interesting now that we're at this age, Justin, where we look at these players and we're like, hey, I actually remember watching your entire Hall of Fame career, which is like, it just means that we're getting old, but it is pretty fun.
I just want to see who the next player is that has the Jordan speech.
Who do you think?
I think the easy comparison would have been Kobe to just come out and have that. But I don't think anybody else can after you saw the greatest of all time and how he approached that. But one can hope. James Harden, we'll say.
LeBron is one day if he ever stops playing, he might still be playing for a while yet. But
I know you're trying to wrap it up, but just to double down on the Dennis Schroder thing, to get back to it. I think a lot of times he can be classified as bad defensively when it's probably not the case. He's just not a plus defender. But to me, it's more of look at the opponents and look at the teams that you're going to be matching up with that theoretically you think you're going to have to get past in the Eastern Conference. There's a lot of size, not only in the backcourt, on the wing, and those are guys he's going to get switched onto. And that's what gives me the most concern, where I would have major pause for him. That I think he can be adequate defensively in the right spot, but in those situations, he's probably not going to succeed.
No, I think it's fair, and we saw it last year with, maybe a less than 100% healthy George Hill finding himself on Jason Tatum on a few possessions and those types of things. So it's just at that size, it can be really difficult. But I would still be surprised, based on what we've seen in this EuroBasket, if he doesn't find his way to an NBA roster, because he can clearly play and has for a while. So we'll see. But as I mentioned yesterday, hopefully he has a terrible game against Greece today, and Greece keep on rolling through this tournament. We'll have a post-game pod after that. Also check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Maybe they're talking about Dennis a little bit around the league. Maybe they're talking about Larry Markkinen, who put up 40-something, 43 the other day for Finland. So he's been on fire as well. Is he with the Jazz now? Is he? I think that's right. He was a part of that.
Yeah.
Well, Utah's going to want to trade him. He's too good. They don't want him on the roster. He's about to have a breakout season. But anyway, we'll be back after the Greece and Germany game. Thanks again for all the support. The subscriptions are coming in. We're up to 4.1 on YouTube, so keep those ticking over. And we will speak to you guys after the game.